And by the by, the American bankers saying the recession could end in the third quarter. Well, are the bankers right one time in a row? We have Bob McTeer, CNBC contributor, former president of the Dallas Fed. We have Pat Newport, U.S. economist at IHS Global Insight, and our great friend Steve Leisman. Bob McTeer, let me go to you. Good housing numbers. I mean, you're talking about, what, 530,000 starts, so it's still pretty modest. Much lower than expected PPI. That's probably good for corporate profits. We like that. But, there's really no recovery in the production sector. And one has the suspicion that we're still cutting inventories out there in business. What is your take?
Well, it's a mixed bag. The industrial production is a very negative number. It's over 13% in the past year, and last month it was 1.1 down. It is goods rather than services. The economy is mainly services, so if you want to look to the bright side, it's in the goods sector. On the housing starts, I guess it's a good thing on balance. It's certainly good to keep construction crews together and available for work in the future. It does, though, keep us from working off some of that inventory, I think, that we needed to work off.
Pat Newport, let me follow up on the producer price index, only because this are the prices that businesses pay. And it looks to me you're at minus 2.5%, 3 months at an annual rate, minus 5% over the last 12 months. Doesn't this give businesses a profitable footing? That is to say, the prices they pay is very low and indeed falling, whereas the CPI is going to come in probably slightly positive, so that the prices they receive is better than what they pay out. Isn't this good for corporate profits?
Well, it may be good for corporate profits. I think the real news with the PPI today is it tells us that there is still a lot of weakness in the economy and that these worries about inflation are overblown. I would like to comment about the housing starts numbers. These numbers were actually they were quite mixed. They're not as optimistic if you look at the details. It's a story of two markets, single-family homes, which are rebounding, but the market for multifamily starts is still in a deep recession. The number increased 61%, but it was not statistically significant. The permits numbers have dropped 11 straight months. They dropped nearly 10%. And there are just very serious problems with the apartment market.
Pat, why did it say a 62% gain in new construction of multifamily dwellings?
Well, the increase in multifamily starts is not statistically significant. You can't believe the number. The number to believe are the multifamily permits. That number is statistically significant, and it's dropped 11 straight months. It's at an all-time low.
The number to watch is the single-family number, and
right.
rather than trying to spin
7.5%.
a positive or negative story, what I would do is look at the starts in single families and see some stability of what's going on there. I don't see a surge. I don't buy any particular surge in single family, but I do see a little bit of a rebound and certainly some stability when you follow the single family across the board here, kind of stabilizing, let's call it in a 375 to 400,000 annual rate, production rate. So that to me is the story here. Let's not get too excited about it, but let's not lose the bit of optimism that's here. And I think the key is that housing may stop detracting from the national wealth in coming quarters.
Bob, when do you think that GDP is going to turn positive? Do you think it's going to be third quarter, fourth quarter? I mean,
that was my question. That's great.
What do you think, Bob?
Bob McTeer?
Yep.
I don't think it's going to be the third quarter. It's possible in the fourth, I think.
So,
our call is that it will probably show some small growth in the third quarter, and then more growth in the fourth. But we're going to have another contraction in the second quarter.
The current second quarter.
Bob McTeer, how do these numbers affect Fed policy? There's obviously a big debate going on. You see a little stronger dollar. The Fed's balance sheet hasn't moved in 6 months, okay? They've flattened out their balance sheet. So on balance, on net, with some term liquidity facilities expiring, and they're still buying bonds, but on net, they are creating now dollars at a slower and slower pace. The dollar itself is rising. Commodities are hitting a little downturn, or maybe not today, but they have been. What's this mean to the Fed, Bob McTeer? You're a former Federal Reserve Bank president at the distinguished Fed Bank of Dallas. Fed policy, tell us about it.
Yes, I think as an academic matter, they're discussing their exit strategy, but my guess is they don't think they're anywhere close to a need to implement it. As you point out, money has not been that easy in the last several months. They had this big spurt, but then it's been offset. And I think Mr. Bernanke's knowledge of the Great Depression will lead him to the conclusion that it's a big it's a big mistake to take the foot off the accelerator prematurely.
What do you
I
think?
He is going to.
No,
I think he's right about that.
All right, I know you do, and you're worried about that, and that's fair enough. I want to get Steve Leisman. Steve, what are you hearing? What are your little ears hearing? Because if you just look at the Fed's balance sheet, which is, I'm sorry we don't have a chart. We've been running this chart, but it has been flat for 6 months. Some people, including myself, believe that the Fed has already embarked on something of an exit strategy.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the comment little ears. I think the visual evidence contradicts that.
I'm in Washington. I can't see as clearly as usual.
Because of the haze in Washington, Larry.
Yes.
I am hearing there is a vigorous debate on the Federal Reserve Board, which those who think the Fed is way behind and those who think, and I think Bob McTeer correctly characterizes what the chairman thinks, which is that he's likely to err on leaving the liquidity in place. That's something that's also, by the way, echoed by Tim Geithner, who comes out of the Fed, which is that they think overwhelming force over an overwhelming amount of time is what's needed here.
Yeah, but Tim Geithner's talking exit strategies also, at least in a theoretical sense. That's been one of the big policy shifts. They're sounding very conservative these days over there in Team Obama.
You know, I was fortunate to be with Jim Bullard in St. Louis yesterday, and he makes an interesting delineation between the permanent part of the Fed's balance sheet and the temporary part. I think the Fed is confident the temporary part runs off. I don't know that they have an exit strategy right now for the permanent part, the purchase of treasuries and mortgage backs. I think that's the thing that Bullard told me they're going to be discussing in earnest this month.
Hey, Bob McTeer, we're supposed to get out, but I want to ask you, you don't really buy that, do you, the permanent versus the temporary balance sheet? Reserves are reserves, and excess reserves are over $800 billion.
Well, I haven't been thinking of it exactly like that, but let me point out that the biggest mistake the Fed made in the Great Depression was thinking that excess reserves on the bank's balance sheet should be removed. It turns out they weren't excess in the minds of the bankers. We have a perfect parallel of that right now. And if we start thinking that those excess reserves on the bank's balance sheet are a sign of too much liquidity, I think we'd be making a mistake.
All right, let's leave it there, guys. Thanks so much.
The banks are scared to death, and they believe those reserves are needed for precautionary balances.
Very interesting.
All right.
Very interesting.